Hey there, green thumb enthusiasts. Ready to dig into some homegrown veggies.
Always up for talking about fresh food.
Today we're diving deep into this NC State University guide
Hmm.
to help you cultivate a garden that's bursting with flavor. I think everyone wants that, right?
Absolutely. It's more than just salads and side dishes,
But yeah.
It's a connection with nature.
Yeah.
That sense of accomplishment when you harvest your first tomato.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing quite like it.
Okay, so let's dig into this information.
Okay.
One thing that surprised me is that you don't need a sprawling backyard to have a successful garden.
That's right.
This guide says a modest 25 by 25 foot plot
Right.
can give you a surprising amount of food. Imagine fresh salads all summer, zucchini bread for days.
It's true. This guide really emphasizes starting small.
Yeah.
I think it's smart.
Okay.
People get caught up in the excitement, bite off more than they can chew.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's very easy to get in over your head. Yeah.
And then feel overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
They want to go from 0 to 60.
Totally. Totally. I know that feeling. I had dreams of a garden. It was going to be like a farmer's market. Huge.
I hear you.
But life gets busy.
It does.
Sometimes those ambitious plans, they just turn into weeds.
It's all right. Start
Yeah.
small.
Speaking of location, this guide really stresses the importance of putting your garden where you can see it.
Yes.
Not too far from your back door, so you can keep an eye on it.
Yeah, it's about accessibility. When it's right there, you're more likely to give it the love and attention it needs
It's true.
to thrive.
Like anything, right?
Right.
It's like having a workout buddy. Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. You said it. You don't want to be dragging hoses across the yard.
No. Ain't nobody got time for that. And speaking of crucial elements for a thriving garden, let's talk sunshine. This guide says most vegetables need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight to do their thing.
At least 6 hours. Sunlight is the engine
Right.
of photosynthesis. It's fascinating
Oh, is it?
how gardening practices have evolved over time. Historically, vegetable gardens were relegated to like the outer edges of properties, hidden away for, purely functional purposes.
Yeah. Out of sight, out of mind.
But now we're seeing a beautiful shift, I think, towards edible landscapes.
Oh.
Seamlessly blending the beauty of ornamental plants
Okay.
with the bounty of fresh produce.
Oh, I like that. So you get like the visual with the taste,
Exactly.
Beautiful and delicious. So, speaking of crucial things, let's get down and dirty, literally. Let's talk about soil.
The foundation.
One of the things that always intimidated me about gardening was creating this perfect soil.
Oh, I see.
This guide says you can work with what you got. You don't have to have,
Right, you don't need to be an expert right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it made me feel better. I don't have to be perfect to do this.
Right.
So it's all about understanding your soil's, like, personality.
Yes.
Is it mostly clay? Sand?
Exactly. Do you know what you have?
I think it's mostly clay. I haven't done a test.
Clay can be great,
Oh, yeah.
incredibly fertile, but it can be a little stubborn when it comes to drainage.
Oh.
That's where soil testing comes in. It's like a blood test for your garden.
Okay.
Reveals your soil's pH level,
Okay.
which tells you how acidic or alkaline it is. You want that sweet spot.
Yeah. So how do we even figure that out?
That's what the soil test will tell you.
Okay. Soil testing, pH levels, it's a whole new world.
It is like a secret code.
Yeah. Speaking of secret codes, this guide actually explains those fertilizer numbers.
Oh, yeah, those can be confusing.
Like the classic 888. I never understood what that meant.
Oh, it's actually pretty simple.
Really?
Yeah, those 3 numbers represent the ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
Okay.
Those are the essential nutrients that fuel plant growth. Think of it as a balanced meal for your veggies.
So it's not just about like dumping a bag of fertilizer on your plants and hoping for the best.
Not quite.
Hmm.
Plants need the right balance of those nutrients, just like we do, right?
Okay, makes sense.
The guide talks about site dressing, which is basically giving your plants extra nutrients mid-season.
Side dressing.
Yeah, because as your veggies grow, they draw nutrients from the soil.
Makes sense. So you gotta like replenish them.
Exactly, to ensure a bountiful harvest. You got it.
Okay. Side dressing. I'm gonna remember that. And speaking of plant care, let's talk about water. I mean, that's pretty crucial.
It is. No water, no life.
Right. This guide says at least 1 inch of water per week.
At least. That can be from rain or irrigation, whatever works for you.
Okay, so 1 inch a week. Got it. But before we even get to those thirsty veggies, let's talk about starting seeds indoors,
Oh yeah, starting seeds indoors is a great way to get a head start.
especially if you have a shorter growing season, right?
Exactly. You can control the environment a lot more too.
Okay. The guide gives ideal temperatures for various seeds.
It's super helpful.
It is, and they recommend using everyday stuff as seed starting containers.
It's true.
I'm all about that upcycling life.
Aluminum foil trays, takeout containers.
Oh, yeah.
Those work great. You just got to make sure to poke some drainage holes in the bottom so they don't get waterlogged.
Right. Good point. But wait, before we get too far, the guide talks about something called damping off disease. That doesn't sound good.
It's not. Basically, a fungal disease that can kill your seedlings.
Oh no, what causes it?
It's often caused by overwatering or using, contaminated soil.
So like dirty containers.
Exactly.
Okay, so hygiene is important.
So important. Clean those containers.
Got it. Use good soil, be careful with the water.
Exactly. And then there's hardening off. That's a step a lot of people miss.
Hardening off?
Yeah, it's like getting your seedlings ready for the real world.
What do you mean?
Well, they've been inside, protected, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly exposing them to wind, sun, all that. Big shock.
That's true.
Like sending your kid to college without any warning.
Ah, poor babies. So how do we harden them off? Gently, I hope.
Gently does it. The guide recommends taking it slow. Start with a few hours a day outside and gradually increase it.
Like dip your toe in the pool before you cannonball.
Exactly. Toughen them up. And when you're at the garden center,
Oh, yeah.
don't be tempted by those tall, leggy seedlings.
Really? Why not? Those are the ones I always grab. They look so impressive.
I know, right?
Ugh.
But they're often more prone to transplant shock,
Oh, no.
and they might not actually be as productive.
So it's all a facade.
Kind of, yeah. Look for stocky, healthy seedlings with a good root system. Those are the ones that'll thrive.
Okay, noted. Stocky and strong. What about planting depth? How deep is too deep?
The general rule is 3 to 4 times the size of the seed.
Oh, that makes sense. So a tiny seed would be planted shallower than like a big bean seed.
You got it. And watch out for soil crusting after it rains.
Oh, yeah, that hard layer on top.
Exactly. The guide says to mix some organic matter into your soil to prevent that.
Compost to the rescue again. This guide really emphasizes compost, huh?
It's like magic for your garden.
So we've got our seedlings started. Now it's time to plant. This guide mentions this wide row planting thing. What is that?
Have you ever noticed how farmers don't plant in single file rows?
Well, yeah, now that you mention it.
A wide row planting is kind of like that. Instead of planting in those traditional rows, you scatter the seeds in a wider band.
Okay, I'm picturing it. How does that help?
It's like creating a mini ecosystem. The plants shade the soil, keeping it moist, and it helps with weeds.
Less weeding. I'm listening.
Right. The guide specifically talks about radishes, carrots, beets, onions, those kinds of things.
Those are some of my favorites. Now, for something I don't like thinning.
I know, it feels brutal, right? Like you're playing favorites with your plant.
Exactly. But it's important, I know.
It is. You're giving the remaining plants room to grow,
Mm-hmm.
so they can reach their full potential.
Okay, I can get behind that. This guide says pretty much every vegetable will benefit from thinning.
It's true, especially root crops like carrots. Those need their space.
I've definitely learned that the hard way. They get all crowded and weird looking.
Right, so thin them out when they're still small.
Okay, got it. Now, what about fall gardens? It'd be amazing to keep those fresh veggies coming after summer.
It is amazing. You can experiment with different crops like broccoli, kale.
Oh, I do love some kale.
Right. The guide suggests August for planting most fall gardens in your area. But if you're up in the mountains,
Yeah.
you might need to adjust the timing a bit.
Right, it's cooler up there.
Exactly. And don't forget about soil prep. You might need to remove any old plants from the summer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Start with a clean slate. Something else I found interesting. The guide says you should plant seeds deeper in the fall than in the spring. Why is that?
Think about it. The soil's drier in the fall, right?
Oh, yeah, that's true. So the seeds need to go deeper to find that moisture.
Bingo. Okay, now let's talk about something that confuses everyone. Watering.
I was just thinking that.
The guide recommends at least an inch of water per week. But how do you know if your plants actually need it?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. I always second guess myself.
Don't just look at the leaves. Feel the soil.
Really?
Yeah, stick your finger in there a couple of inches down. If it feels dry, water it. If it's still moist, you can wait.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like checking a cake for doneness, but with soil instead of batter.
Exactly. And don't water too frequently. It's better to water deeply less often.
Makes sense. Why is that?
Shallow watering leads to shallow roots. You want those roots to grow deep to find water.
Oh, that's a good point. So, like, don't baby them, make them work for it a little.
Exactly. Tough love for strong roots.
No, I use sprinklers. Any tips for avoiding that crazy runoff?
Yeah, use a low application rate, especially if you have that clay soil you mentioned, and water in the morning.
So it doesn't just evaporate.
You got it. And don't forget about mulch.
Oh, yeah, mulch. It's like a magic blanket for your garden.
Right. Keeps the moisture in, keeps the weeds out.
It's a win-win. I'm a fan of the organic stuff like compost or leaves.
Me too. It breaks down and feeds your soil. It's like closing the loop. You know?
Yeah.
Speaking of closing the loop, what about those weeds? Got any strategies for keeping them under control?
I really try to avoid using chemicals,
I hear you. The guide focuses on prevention.
but catching them early.
Exactly. A hoe is still your best friend. But they do mention herbicides.
Okay.
Just be careful. Make sure you get the right kind for your veggies.
And read those instructions.
Yes.
Safety first.
So even with the best laid plans, things can still go wrong, right?
That's gardening. That's life, right? But don't worry, this guide's got a whole section on troubleshooting.
Oh, good. Like a plant doctor on call.
Yeah, it can be super helpful. Like if your tomatoes are flowering but not producing any fruit,
Ah, the worst.
right? It could be the temperature. Tomatoes can be kind of finicky.
They are. Too hot, too cold.
Exactly. They like it just right. Speaking of tomatoes, what about blossom and rot?
Don't even get me started. I've had my fair share of battles with that.
The guide says it's usually a calcium deficiency.
Really. So I need to be adding calcium to my soil. Well, maybe. That's why the soil test is so important. It'll tell you what your soil needs.
Okay, so soil test first, then I can figure out if I need to add calcium.
Exactly. And that goes for other nutrients too. Balanced soil, healthy plants, it's all connected.
It is. Okay, another big one. Pests and diseases. I'm all about keeping things natural.
Me too. The guide emphasizes prevention.
Like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of thing?
Exactly. So choosing disease-resistant varieties when you can,
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
rotating your crops,
Keeps the pests guessing, right?
right, and keeping your garden tidy. No hiding places for those pesky bugs.
Okay, those are all good tips. But what if, despite my best efforts,
It happens.
I still get pests or diseases?
Well, first you got to figure out what you're dealing with. Proper identification is key.
Makes sense. Don't want to just throw any old thing at it.
Exactly. Once you know what you're up against, then you can choose the right approach. Sometimes it's as simple as hand-picking the bugs off.
Oh yeah, I've done that.
Other times you might need to use something like insecticidal soap.
Okay.
The guide talks about that.
And I'm assuming they emphasize using anything like that very careful.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Always follow the instructions on the label
Yeah.
and be mindful of beneficial insects like pollinators.
We need those pollinators. Okay, so we've planted, we've watered, we've weeded, we've battled the bugs.
Now that all right,
Now it's time to enjoy the fruits of our labor. But knowing when to harvest, that's key.
it is. You want those veggies at their peak flavor.
Exactly. I'll be honest, I've definitely picked tomatoes too early in the past, thinking they were ready, and then
Bummer, right? No flavor.
the worst. So how do I know when it's the perfect time to harvest?
Well, the guide gives specific tips for each veggie.
Oh, cool.
Like for beans, you want to harvest them before the seeds get too big. That's when they're the sweetest.
Okay, makes sense. What about melons? How do you know when those are ripe?
Apparently, it's all about the sound.
The sound.
Yeah. You thump it, and if it sounds kind of dull, that means it's ripe.
Who knew? You learn something new every day.
And that's what we're here for.
Speaking of learning new things, this guide also talks about composting, which I love.
It's the best. Turning your scraps into garden gold.
It's amazing how nature works, right?
It is. It's like we take care of the earth, and then the earth takes care of us.
I love that. Full circle.
Full circle.
Well, my friend, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
This NC State guide is like a treasure trove of information.
It is a great resource.
So much good stuff in here.
Definitely recommend checking it out.
For anyone who's listening, if you're feeling inspired, don't wait.
Yeah.
Get out there, get your hands dirty, and start growing some delicious food.
You won't regret it.
Until next time, happy gardening, everyone.